Hi, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I hope you enjoy this video. So, unless there are any questions, I have muted you guys, remember. So if you have a question, then just raise your hand or type it in the chat, and I will get to your question as soon as I can. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Okay. So what you should be looking at right now is the lead-based paint and lead-based hazards disclosure. What this is for any house that was built before 1978, and you have to use this actually in rentals also. So if you're with leases, so if you're helping a landlord rent out a property, doing leases or finding lessees for them, this also has to be included in any of those lease agreements. Now, what this is stating is that the seller is aware of any lead-based hazards. Now, I would suggest that probably 99% to 99.9% of your sellers have no idea if there's lead-based paint in the house. This above here is just warnings about lead statements, saying when housing built before 1978 may contain lead-based paint. This is about how the EPA's lead-based paint renovation, repair, and painting rule. This section down here is for the seller or the landlord. We have knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the housing other than the following. So if they don't know of any problems with lead-based paint, then they would technically leave this blank. Okay? We have no reports or records pertaining to lead-based paint or other lead-based paint hazards in the housing other than the following, which previously or as an attachment to the ZNM have been provided to the buyer tenant. Again, blank if they have nothing, and that's okay. These two sections should most of the time be blank. Seller signs it. Now, for sales transactions, it says buyer has 10 days unless otherwise agreed in real estate purchase contract to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. So that's its own thing from the normal investigations. I have 10 days from acceptance to go through and do a lead investigation if I want to. Now, the problem with lead is that the remediation process for lead-based paint is crazy expensive and time-consuming and intrusive, right? They have to dig up the dirt around the house after they take off all the paint. They have to dig up the dirt. They have to do so many feet of dirt has to be removed so that the lead-based paint isn't leaching into the ground. It's a huge process and very expensive. Again, this is your seller filling this out. So if your seller has no knowledge of any lead-based paint hazards, any reports or anything, then these two sections in paragraph 1 are going to be left blank. Your seller's going to sign it. You're going to forward it to the buyer. You're going to sign it here with your printed name and your signature, and then you're going to send that over to the buyer. Okay, so that's the lead-based paint. That's one of the what I'm looking at in these is the mandatory disclosures that are in your purchase agreement, right? These are the things that have to be provided no matter what. There's some exceptions for the TDS and the SPQ, but we'll also talk about the disclosure that covers those. So that's the lead-based paint. Does anybody have questions about the lead-based paint disclosure? It's one of the ones that we do, and it just kind of gets glossed over, but it is important to ask the sellers if they have any information about lead-based paint. If they did renovations on a house that was prior, did they know if the contractor did the proper remediation when they did the whatever renovations they did, the add-ons, the tear-downs, the repainting. Jesus, you have your hands up, so go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to mention that the fact that the lead paint is or lead is found on the property, that doesn't mean that it's dangerous as long as it's contained. So we have to let that know to our buyers that the fact it could be some paint because it was built in 1950, 1940, and even though they find it, doesn't mean that it's dangerous because it is being contained.
Well, they call that encapsulation. It can be encapsulated. That's when it's painted over. But if there's any chipping paint, and there's lead-based paint to be found, it's dangerous, whether it's been encapsulated or not. So you have to be careful about telling people that anything isn't dangerous. So my suggestion would be you don't ever say it's not dangerous. What you do say is they've done what they needed to encapsulate it. You make with that what you will, but never tell somebody it isn't dangerous. Because if you say to your client, "Oh, don't worry, it's been painted over, it's not dangerous anymore," and someone in their house gets lead poisoning, guess who they're going to turn around and point their finger at? So don't ever tell anybody something's not dangerous. You just are sharing facts. Hey, there was there may be lead paint in here because it was built prior to 1978 or 79, and they may have encapsulated the paint. Looks great, it's brand new paint, everything's fine. It may be okay with that paint, but you can't ever guarantee to anybody that something is no longer dangerous. So be really careful about those words in particular. Okay, but yeah, you still can't tell them it's been encapsulated, and that's fine. It's acceptable for it to be encapsulated. But if you need to take it any further than that, then you have 10 days to do a lead-based paint inspection, which again could turn out to be costly and troublesome for a transaction. Okay, so let's move on from that. What we're going to look at next is the real estate transfer disclosure. Now, again, the real estate transfer disclosure is that it's a transfer disclosure statement that the seller is making disclosures about the condition of the property that may affect its desirability in the buyer's eyes. So one of the issues that we have a lot of times with this TDS, especially because it's something the seller fills out, is they're hesitant to really make the proper disclosures. Because, and I've heard it too from sellers, is, well, if we disclose this, if we put this stuff on, it's going to make it so people maybe don't want to buy it or they don't find it as valuable. And I can understand that feeling from a seller's perspective. But the idea of not making the disclosures in a way that makes sense, right? If we're not disclosing everything that we know, then forget about the desirability of the property. We have to now worry about the liability of the seller after the sale of the property. So it's really imperative that when we're having conversations with our sellers, that we're helping them kind of guide them through the TDS. Because for those of you guys that are homeowners, or even somebody that's, rented a place for a long time, there are things that happen in your home that you have gotten used to. There are clanging pipes, there are, burners on a stove that don't work, there are light switches that you don't know what they turn on, right? There are things that happen in people's homes that when you live there for an extended period of time, you kind of become a little blind to it, deaf to it, because you're so used to it. So our job as agents is to remind people of these things, these potential things. And I don't mean that we're going to tell them, hey, you got to put this, you got to put that. But we ask them some questions. When we get to the question section, we kind of have to expand on it a little bit just to help them remember, because the more that they disclose, the better. And I'm not saying to make things up to disclose, far from it. We just want to make sure that they're not missing out on those things that normal people become immune to, for example, right? Like if somebody has pipes that clang, or that you flush the toilet and the shower gets cold, those kind of things, you're just so used to it, it becomes part of everyday life. You don't think about the idea when it comes to having to share that with a potential buyer. Okay, so let's look at the TDS. Now, the TDS, as we look at it here, this section, from everything from the top of the page to this end where it says seller is or is not occupying the property, that's you, the agent, touching that and filling out. So whatever it's calling for there, you're going to fill that out. Once we get below that where it says A, that's no longer you. That is the seller who is checking those boxes. Okay, you don't check them, the seller checks them. And it used to be in zip forms, they would allow you to type little X's in these boxes. Can't do that anymore. So you got to make sure that the seller is the one who's checking those boxes if they're going to check them. The seller is the one answering the questions if they're going to answer them, not you. It should not be in your handwriting. Now, if you send them using something like Glide, or I believe now with SkySlope for us, we have Breeze. So if you send those disclosures that way, where the sellers just kind of answer a questionnaire and it gets filled out, it'll have the pre-printed check boxes and the answers, but it's done by your seller electronically through a questionnaire. So those will look a little bit different. What was the part that we fill out and stop there? Right here, just this very first paragraph from the beginning all the way down to the letter A. You guys are okay to fill that stuff out at the top. That's your responsibility. Anything past that letter A until we get to the third page is the seller's only. Okay. So this is the real estate transfer disclosure statement. Up here at the top, it says this is a statement is a disclosure of the condition of the above described property in compliance with section 1102 of the Civil Code as of blank date. You're going to write the date that they're actually filling this form out. It is not a warranty of any kind by the seller or any agent representing any principals in this transaction, and it is not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the principals may wish to obtain. So just because, and that's what we have to share with our buyers, is just because you've gotten this disclosure doesn't mean you don't have to still do your investigations, do your due diligence to find out about the property, because like I had discussed with you guys just a moment ago, sellers don't remember everything. They don't remember every little defect. They don't remember every repair they made. They don't remember the issues they've had, right? When they're selling the house, that house is a palace to them, right? You guys have all gone on listing presentations and it is the best house on the block, regardless of it in reality being the best house on the block or not. So they're not going to remember. Okay. So you can't rely on it that it's the only information that's necessary. And that's why the home inspections are so important for our buyers. And that's why going through to the city and checking for permits and doing the things that we do, that's why they're so important, because sellers don't always remember everything that needs to be disclosed. Okay. Coordination with other disclosure forms. The real estate transfer disclosure statement is made in pursuant to Section 1102. We went through other statutes require disclosures depending upon the details of the particular real estate transaction. For example, special study zone or purchase money liens on residential property. Substituted disclosures. The following disclosures and other disclosures required by law, including the natural hazard disclosure, reportment, or statement, that may include airport annoyances, earthquake, fire, flood, or special assessment information, have or will be made in connection with this real estate transfer and are intended to satisfy the disclosure obligations on this form, where the subject matter is the same. So, for example, if there's a question on here about airport noise, right? And you do an NHD report from a third-party company, and that NHD report discloses that there is, sufficient airport noise, or that there is an earthquake, fire, or flood danger in that area, and you don't disclose it here, your seller is still protected because the NHD statement had that disclosure in it. Does that make sense? Okay, so the NHD report will protect you if you miss a disclosure on this transfer disclosure if those two items are identical. Okay. Okay. So these are things that we can attach as part of our disclosures. Inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale or receipt for deposit. So, for example, if there was, say, an inspection report that was requested as part of the purchase agreement, like maybe there was a soil stability test that was required or whatever, and the seller had one already, then you could check that box and include it. If you have an inspection report from a previous escrow. So I had an escrow, the buyer canceled, but they had done their professional home inspection. They shared a copy with me, which they're required to do, and I have that copy. Then what I do is I amend my disclosures for my new escrow, and I check off the box additional inspection reports or disclosures, and I put professional home inspection dated whatever the date is, and now I include that into my TDS. That becomes part of the disclosure. So not only am I disclosing the things that I know, I'm disclosing the things that were found in that report. So now what I've done is I've protected myself even further, right? The protection I've given myself as a seller and as a listing agent is greater now because I've disclosed even more than I knew personally. So you have to start thinking like that as listing agents when you have multiple escrows, right? When you have one escrow that falls out and you move into another one, whatever reports and disclosures you have or whatever reports are obtained in that first escrow should now become part of your disclosures for any subsequent escrows after that. It's going to help protect your seller. Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions? I guess some people are having a hard time getting into the class. So I'm trying to resend some stuff to them. So pardon me for a second. But any questions about the disclosure so far? No? All right. Okay, so let's start moving down a little bit. Now, if you don't have anything, if you don't have any previous reports, you don't have any other inspection reports that you're going to include or any other things that you've done, then you're going to check this box that says no substitute disclosures for this transfer. Okay, it's just going to be this. Now, this is the seller's information, right? Right here. So this is all the stuff that the seller's going to answer. We're not going to worry about this. This is just them saying that we're going to disclose what's here, but there is no warranty that is implied by this. So if I disclose that the property contains these items, it doesn't mean I'm warranting them afterwards. What does need to happen though is you have to disclose if there's anything not working. Okay. Okay, so the following are representations made by the seller and are not the representation of the agent, if any. This information is a disclosure and is not intended to be part of any contract between the buyer and seller. So what that means is that even though it's a disclosure and it's not part of the contract, it just means that this isn't, how do I want to explain it? This isn't what we're purchasing. It's just letting you know any issues about what it is you're purchasing. Sorry, there was a question here. When you say previous report, does that include appraisals? Yeah, absolutely. If you have a copy of a previous appraisal, I would also make that part of my disclosures to give to them. Okay. All right. So the subject property has the items checked below. You see there's a little asterisk. We're going to skip down to the C note on page 2. That's the asterisk. And we'll go back, but I wanted to see, where is that note? Oh, installation of a listed appliance, device, or amenity is not a precondition of sale or transfer of the dwelling. The carbon monoxide device, garage door opener, or child resistant pull barrier may not be in compliance with the safety standards relating to, respectively, carbon monoxide standards, device standards of Chapter 8, blah blah blah, automatic reversing device standards of Chapter 12. So what it's referencing is the civil code for these things that are supposed to be there. So what it's saying is that it just might not be in compliance with those civil codes, and because it is checked off doesn't mean that it uh, is a precondition of the sale or transfer, meaning like we don't have to put this in prior to selling the property. Okay, so that's what they're talking about, like the fence and the garage door opener and those things. So let's go back up. So here is the amenities, if you want to call it, that the property may have. So the seller's going to just go down there and check off what is remaining with the property. And that's what you have to be clear on, okay? Is because sometimes sellers were like, well, we have a microwave, we have a, rain gutter, we have alarms, we have, like, they just say we have all this stuff. Well, some of the stuff may not be saying. So if it isn't, like, for example, if their microwave is not a built-in microwave, make sure that your seller is not checking off the box that says microwave. Because now what's going to happen is you're going to have a miscommunication. The buyer's going to believe that that means a microwave has to come with the property, and that's not the case, but you're still going to have that fight. So just make sure that they're clear, okay? We're not going to go through each one of these things as far as what you should disclose and how how you disclose when there's an issue, but there's a space down here if there's a problem. So it says, are the best of your seller's knowledge any of the above that are not in operating condition? So if any of these things, the microwave, the dishwasher, the garbage disposal, the rain gutters, if any of those things are not in working order, then you would describe it down here on these measly 2 lines. Okay. Now, that's not going to be enough space, those 2 lines. So if there are things up there that need to be fixed or that have issues with them, then you're going to put C addendum, right? Now, I know you can type away, it'll just switch over to a text overflow addendum. I just feel it's a little sloppy. I would rather just write C addendum and then type everything on an addendum, make sure it's clear, and do it that way. Okay. But some of the things that you may want to take a look at. So, range and oven. So, oven and range are when a stove is 2 separate pieces, right? We have a stovetop, or you have like a stovetop that's built into the counter, and maybe you have some ovens that are built into the cabinetry, that's the range in the oven. But when we have a stove, a freestanding stove where it has the range in the oven as one piece, if that is not built in, it doesn't have to stay. But if I am leaving it behind, then I would check off both range and oven for those things. And again, like I talked to you before, the microwave, unless the microwave is built in, right? You have those that are built in above the stove, above the range, where they're part of the vent hood, then those are remaining. So you want to make sure you check those out. Some other things that you may want to look at: rain gutters, make sure that they're complete. Sometimes homes only have rain gutters, maybe only on the front. If they only are on the front, what I would suggest is maybe you make a note that the rain gutters are only on the front of the house, that they don't go around the sides or, around the back, or cover the whole property. Um, the what was I? My mind went blank where I was looking at. Burglar alarms. Make sure if they're being financed or not paid off, that we're disclosing that they're not paid off, and we should probably disclose how much the monitoring for those is. Okay, so just as you go through each one of these things, that's why it's important that we have those conversations. So earlier, when I was talking about having your seller fill out the disclosures, when we're talking about the stove or the range in the oven, hey, are there any burners that don't work? Is there any issues you have with the ovens, right? With the dishwashers, any problems you have with the dishwasher, right? Sometimes dishwashers, uh, they don't have that little escape valve on the top, and if they don't have that, maybe they weren't installed properly. So sometimes we have to ask questions like, hey, was your dishwasher installed with permits? Was it installed correctly? The washer and dryer hookups, if you see washer and dryer hookups in a place that seem odd, sometimes in the garage they're unpermitted. Sometimes you've seen, I'm sure that you guys that have been around for a while, you've seen the washer and dryer hookups on the patio. Those generally are not permitted, they're not legal. So you got to ask the questions. Hey, those washer and dryer hookups that I see in the garage, were they permitted? Do you know? Were they like that when you bought it? The ones on the patio, was it like that when you bought it? Do you know if it's permitted or not? Because we have to make sure that they're not putting themselves in a position where they're leaving themselves open to liability after the fact. Okay. So as you go through each one of these things, we just got to make sure that there's no issues. Be careful about these things too, like pool and child resistant barrier, because we don't necessarily know. Just because there's a fence, just because there's some kind of a barrier around the pool, doesn't mean it constitutes a child resistant barrier. There's specific criteria that it has to meet in order to be considered a child resistant barrier. So if you don't know and they don't know, then don't check the box. Okay? Questions about the items on here, and or any questions about this TDS, and as the seller goes through and is filling this out. So I'm going to have one copy of this TDS, and they're going to have another. And we're just going to go line by line together, and I'm going to talk them through filling this out. This is what should be happening with our transfer disclosures. Okay? So let me answer the questions. Where there's exhaust fans, right, in the bathroom. Okay, Maricela, go ahead and either type your question, or let me find you on here. Where are you? There you are. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, hello?
Yeah.
Okay, regarding the pool and the barrier, like when they put a little fence or whatever, can you check off like that there is a fence, but it may not be like like a a barrier, like a real child resistant barrier? Like there's a
Yeah.
fence, but
Yes.
would you just put that in the remarks? Like there's a fence, but we're not sure if it's
You could do that. You absolutely probably should, and it's good you brought that up. You should probably do that. Is just tell them, hey, though there is a fence around the pool, we don't know if it constitutes a child protective barrier or child resistant barrier. The
okay.
child resistant
Cool.
barrier, I think the threshold for it is it has to have a self closing and locking gate, and it has to have only vertical slats in the fence, and it has to be a certain height, and I don't know what that is, so it's hard for me to tell you exactly what to look for. But if you don't know, and if it's anything other than vertical slats and self-closing gates, it's not going to be. So you'd be pretty safe in assuming that it isn't a child-resistant barrier. But yeah, write it in. Put it in the you could put it in this remarks section down here where we're talking about adding the addendum right in there that the pool does have a fence, but the seller is not aware if it is a child resistant barrier, and the buyer to satisfy themselves to the safety of the fence. Something simple like that. Okay, so where the exhaust fans are, do you know if there's any 220 volt wiring in the property? If fireplaces, where they are? If they have a gas starter, what the roof type is to the best of their knowledge, the age to the best of their knowledge, and anything else. Again, here is if there's any issues with the things that are above, we're going to write in their scene addendum, or write if it fits, just write it right in those 2 lines. Okay. Then we're going to go down here. Are you, the seller, aware of any significant defects, malfunctions in any of the following, right? And you're going to put yes or no. Now, the way that this is structured, it feels like it should go the other way, but yes, if there is, and if yes, you're going to check the space below where there is an issue. Okay. Significant defects and malfunctions. So you got to keep that in mind, and this is if the seller is aware of those. So is there anything wrong with the interior walls, the ceilings, the floors, the exterior walls, the insulation, the roofs, the windows, the doors, the foundation, driveways, the sidewalks, the fences, the electrical systems, the plumbing, other structural components? If there are any issues that the seller is aware of. Now, things that you might want to think about are recurring maintenance, like with the plumbing and the sewer. Is there a problem with the plumbing that is something that we have to take care of all the time? Well, then that would be a significant defect or malfunction. That's something that the buyer would need to be aware of, because they're going to have to deal with that same issue when they become the owners, right? So one of the big ones is when you see a big tree in the front yard of a house, and that's where their main waste line is, and sometimes roots will grow through those when you see those big giant trees. And what has to happen is, on a regular basis, a company has to come out and they have to run that snake through, clear out those roots so that they don't get the backup on the waistline. So whether that be every 6 months, once a year, whatever it is, it's recurring maintenance. So if you see a house with a big tree and you're going through this section with your sellers, you may want to ask them, hey, do you have to have a plumber come out regularly because of the tree out front? And if they say no, then that's it. That's all. That's where it stands. We don't have to then try to say, well, maybe you do and you just don't know it. No, ask the question, asked and answered, and leave it like that. If there is no issue that they're aware of, you leave it alone. Because remember, all this stuff that we're talking about is, are they aware of it? Now, if a seller is filling out this TDS and it's a supplemental, like a secondary escrow, right? You've had an escrow and then you canceled, and now this is your second one that's open. And there is stuff in the home inspection report or in any other report, if you're not including those old reports as part of your TDS, now you have to do a new TDS and disclose those things, because now you're aware of them. Even though you became aware of them from a report that was paid for and ordered by somebody else, the seller is now aware of that defect if they weren't prior to that. So now it's my duty to disclose it. But if I include that as part of my disclosures, I don't have to re-answer the questions and say, yes, because of this report, we do know. I'm putting that report in. Now it's being disclosed. I'm covered. Okay, so that's, again, another reason why it's important for those prior reports to be part of your disclosures going forward on new escrows. Okay. Questions about this stuff above. Okay. Now, this says significant defects and malfunctions. Is a nail hole in the wall a significant defect or malfunction? Probably not. I wouldn't worry about it too much for your seller to say, oh, well, there's a hole in the wall from where we put a nail out and had a painting up. I wouldn't worry about that. That would be something like if there's some huge, like some really good sized cracks, or there's some kind of settling, or the wall's leaning, or the floor is drooping, like that kind of stuff. Not the same, we're not talking about cosmetic issues. Okay, we're not talking about cosmetic issues. If there's an oil stain in the driveway, I'm not too worried about them putting oil stain on the driveway here. So let's not get super nitpicky. Okay, because the problem with being super nitpicky when we find something is that if there's an issue with a disclosure problem, okay. So for example, we start getting super like, hey, there's oil stains. There's some small cracks in your sidewalk, right? There's some nail holes in the wall there that were from a picture. Now in our disclosure, we're not going to put nail holes. We're just going to write holes. But I start doing that. I start getting that nitpicky. And then there's something major that gets missed, right? There's something major that gets missed from the seller. And we're talking about the seller right now. We're not talking about the agent. There's something that gets missed by the seller that's major. But you have all these tiny little minute details that are disclosed by the seller. Then they're going to look at it like you specifically did not disclose this, because if this was a major defect, right? If this was a major defect that you failed to disclose, but you disclosed all these other little trivial things, you specifically held that out. And that's what it's going to look like to the people that are coming after you if there was some kind of a disclosure issue. And yes, Maricela, we do. Maricela asked in the chat, we do disclose the holes in the walls on our Avid. And yes, we do, because that's our visual inspection. It's what we see in the property. But we aren't going to get super descriptive. It is just going to be hole in wall, period. Not small hole, not big hole, not nail hole, not doorknob hole, not anything else. We're not going to diagnose. We're just going to state. That's it. Okay. So let's move on. Okay. So we went through that stuff. Now, again, are you, the seller, aware of any of the following? Substances, materials, or products which may be an environmental hazard, such as but not limited to asbestos, formaldehyde, radon gas, lead-based paint, mold, fuel, or chemical storage tanks, contaminated soil or water on the subject property. Are you aware of it? Yes or no? Period. That's all it is. It's a yes or no question. And guess what? If they say yes, then they answer down here what the yes means. And if you don't have enough space, see addendum. So as you go through all these questions, it's either a yes or no. And again, I don't have to push them into saying, well, you should know, you don't know, or make them make up something else. It's if they know or not. Are you aware of it? And I would guess that there's a lot of stuff in here that may be true about a property that our sellers are not aware of. But guess what happens? Like this one, if there's any kind of a chemical problem or contaminated soil, the NHD is probably going to answer that. If there's an issue with an encroachment or an easement, like you look at number 3 here, that the seller might not be aware of, guess where it is going to be? It's going to be in the preliminary title report. But if my seller doesn't know, do you believe that there are buyers out there that have, or sellers out there that have bought a home and it has an easement or an encroachment on it that they're unaware of, but somehow their sale was able to go through and now they're living in this house for the last 10, 15 years? They had no idea this encroachment or easement existed, and they don't know to disclose it. Do you believe that happens? Because it happens all the time. So what we have to do is, again, this question is, are you aware of? Are you aware of any easements? Now, let's not make things up. I know that sometimes there are easements for utilities and stuff like that, and those exist. Those are common easements. They're not an issue. Even if you know that you have a telephone pole in the back of your house, or there's power lines that run over your house, or whatever it is, there's an easement for it. Just about every property has a utilities easement on it. It doesn't need to be disclosed here, and it's going to be in the prelim. So don't worry about it. Don't push it. Again, if there's any flooding, drainage, or damage, or drainage or grading problems, that's a question you should ask. Is there anywhere on the property where water builds up and stays for a long time? And the reason for that is because it attracts mosquitoes. It can do damage to the property. So you do want to ask, kind of remind them, because again, that's one of those things that we may forget, and that's okay. We don't have to push them. Just ask that question. Is there anywhere on the property where water builds up after it rains or after you water and it stays there for a long time? That's all I need to know. So ask that question. Also, if you maybe see a flower bed up against the wall, right, in the front of a house. Any zoning violations, all of these things are pretty straightforward questions, but just remember, it's only if the seller's aware of it, okay? If there's any of those issues, if any of these questions up here are a yes, then I have to answer what the yes is down here if in this section. I have to do it. And if there's not enough space, then I'm going to write C addendum, okay? Now, seller signs it. Now it's back to the agents again, okay? Now it's back to the agents again. So now we're the agents. This is for the agent representing the seller, the first one. The undersigned, based on the above inquiry of the sellers as to the condition of the property and based on the reasonable, competent, and diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas of the property in conjunction with that inquiry, states the following. For us, in our office at Century 21 All Stars, we require the agent's visual inspection disclosure. We require that form to have for you to have a complete file. The state doesn't make that a requirement. The state of California doesn't make the requirement, so every office may be slightly different. So you may not get avids from listing agents on every deal you do. You may not get an avid if you're the listing agent from the buyer's agent on every deal you do. But you guys are required that work here, and I'm sure there's some other offices out there that do make that a requirement also. And the reason for it is it is a much easier way for you to do your visual inspection. Agent notes no items for disclosure. You can check that box if you don't believe there's anything you need to disclose. But you could do that for us, you got to do that on an Avid. Or you can write your visual inspection disclosure notes right here. Those are your three options. And that's acceptable for the state of California. Again, specific to Century 21 All-Stars, you've got to check that top box and fill out an agent visual inspection disclosure. Okay? Same thing on the buyer side. You're going to print your name, you're going to sign your name, you're going to date it. Okay? Buyer's agent's going to do the exact same thing. The buyers and the sellers are going to sign here again after that section, and then you're going to transfer that over. Now, the disclosures have to be delivered within 7 days of acceptance. That's the rules, right, according to the contract, unless you've negotiated anything different. But one of the issues that we have, though, is if you go back and you say that, hey, this TDS is part of the reports and disclosures that have to be delivered to the buyer in the first 7 days, most of the time as agents, because we like to procrastinate, we don't do our Avid in the first 7 days. So technically, this is an incomplete disclosure because, as you can see, this attached visual inspection is part of the TDS. So what does that mean for you as agents? It means that that Avid has to be completed in the first 7 days also. So for the listing agent, generally not an issue. For the listing agent, not a problem, right? Because I'm the listing agent, I can do my Avid anytime after I take the listing. As the buyer's agent, though, is when it becomes more of an issue for you as buyer's agents to get this done properly and get done timely, because you wait until you go and do the home inspection, or you wait until who knows when, the final walkthrough for some of you I've seen. But you've done it after the fact. So let's start to try to get in the habit of having our Avid done as soon as possible. Now, next week, some of you are going to get to see Robert Brand. He's going to talk about the Avid, and he's going to talk about the TDS. He's going to talk about filling it out and the things you should and shouldn't disclose. We're going to go over the Avid a little bit right now. But it's a mistake to do your Avid, to do your visual inspection at the same time the buyer is doing their professional home inspection. Do not do that. Okay. So I'm going to switch to the Avid next, but is there any questions about the TDS before I move on? Now's your chance. No? You guys got it? All right, great. Let's look at the Avid then. Is doing the Avid common when showing the home? No. I would wait until you've got your offer accepted before you spend. The Avid is time consuming. For those of you, as you can see here, here's the agent's visual inspection disclosure, should be up on your screen right now. The Avid's going to take you, an hour or so to go through and actually look at the property. So no, doing it on a home showing is not. It's probably not the right thing to do. So Jenny's asking, is there a reason why you should not do the Avid during the home inspection? Yeah, and Robert Brand will talk about it a little bit more next week. It's because there's some things that may be exposed to you in a home inspection that you wouldn't get from normally just doing a diligent visual inspection. Because we have to, and that's what we're going to talk about right now, is this is a diligent visual inspection. This is not about you climbing into the attic. This is not about you going on the roof. This is not about you going under the house. This is not, you shouldn't be opening cabinets and turning on water and doing things like that. That's not what the visual inspection calls for. The visual inspection is just that. It's me walking through the property, just like a buyer would, looking at the features of the property and making notes about things that may be cause an issue for a buyer, right? So that's why you shouldn't be doing it as an Avid, and I'm sure Robert will talk about that a little bit more next Thursday for those of you that are able to be on that class. Okay. Any other questions before I start? All right, let's look. So this inspection disclosure concerns the residential property situated in. That's the property address, right? This property is a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. This avid form is for unit number. That means that if you have 2, 3, 4 units, guess what you're going to have? 2, 3, 4 avids. Okay, so you're going to have one avid for each unit. Now, if you have, let's say, a duplex that's one building, right? It's not two separate buildings. Then you will have one avid that will do the entire interior of the structure or exterior of the structure and the interior of one of the units. And your second avid for unit 2 will be just the interior of that second unit. You don't have to do the exterior over again. Now, if they're separate buildings, if each unit is separate, then each one of those avids for each unit will do both inside and out. Okay. So this just says California law requires for the broker to do their diligent visual inspection. Okay, don't worry about that. California law does not require the agent to inspect the following: areas that are not reasonably and normally accessible, areas offsite of the property, public records or permits, common areas of planned developments, condominium, stock cooperatives, and the like, right? So I don't have to go, hey, and I have to check and see what's happening on the gazebo that's part of this condo complex, right? No, it's just the property itself. Okay, and only the things that are accessible. Agent inspection limitations. Because the agent's duty is limited to conducting a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of reasonably and normally accessible areas of only the property being offered for sale, there are several things that the agent will not do. What follows is a non-exclusive list of examples of limitations on the scope of the agent's duty. Roof and attic. Agent will not climb onto a roof or into an attic. Interior. Agent will not move or look under or behind furniture, pictures, wall hangings, or floor coverings. Agents will not look up chimney or into cabinets or open locked doors. Again, it has to be accessible areas. Okay, so if I don't have access, if a door is locked, I do my visual inspection of the rooms that I can get into. I don't have to open the cupboards, or I don't have to go inside the chimney and see if the flue works. I don't have to go in the attic. I don't have to go under the house. Okay? I don't have to check and see if the appliances work. I don't have to measure the property. I don't have to determine if there's mold or asbestos or anything else like that. Off property conditions. I don't have to pull permits or inspect public records. I don't have to do that. Just for any items disclosed as a result of agent's visual inspection or by others, agent will not provide an analysis of or determine the cause of source of the disclosed matter, nor determine the cost of any possible repair. That means I'm not going to diagnose. If there is a leak, if there's a stain in the ceiling, I'm not going to say, oh, that stain is from a water leak in the roof. I'm not going to say that. I don't know. And I'm also not going to say, oh, that stain is from a water leak and it should cost approximately $500 to fix. I'm not doing that, and I'm not required to do that. Eric, you had a question with your hand up, so let me unmute you. Go ahead, Eric.
Can you hear me, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay. You said about the units. What about if one of those units tenant not providing access? Let's say two units not providing access.
Then you don't have access, so you do your visual inspection based on the exterior, right? Remember, this is where you have access to. It says on there, hey, we're going to make a note. Unit number 2, interior access was denied by tenant. This visual inspection is only covering the exterior of the unit. Pretty straightforward. Yeah. You don't have to go and say, like, I'm going to force you to make me go in there. I mean, you should try. But if you can't get access because the seller is not able to get access through the tenant, then don't worry about it. You just do your best. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So this is just saying that, hey, this inspection is just like any, it's not a substitute for any other disclosure. It's just me telling you what I see in the property. Okay? Buyers should review any disclosures obtained from the seller, obtain advice about the inspections of the property from other appropriate professionals, and review any findings of those professionals with the person who's prepared them. If buyer fails to do so, buyer is acting against the advice of broker, right? So they're saying, hey, if you get an inspection and a disclosure and some other information from people, and they say that stuff should happen or that it's going to cost a certain amount for repairs, you need to go to that person that prepared that report and make them the one who explains to you what that means. It's not the agent that's going to do that. What if there is mold visible somewhere? If there is mold visible somewhere, you're going to disclose that there is the appearance of a mold or a mildew, and you're not going to try to disclose what it is. There's the appearance of a mold or a mildew in the shower, buyer to investigator, whatever. But you're not going to say, oh, this is mold or this is mildew only. You're going to be, there is some discoloration, right? There's a substance that's coloring the wall, but you're not going to diagnose what it is because it might not be mold. And then I put mold and now all of a sudden it's mold, right? So we have to be really careful about that. Okay. So here, if this property is a duplex, triplex, fourplex, this avid is for unit again, which unit it's for. Inspection performed by real estate broker firm name. So this is Century 21 All Stars here. The inspection date and time and the conditions, right? Was it sunny? Was it raining? Was it windy? Right? Because the conditions that you do your inspection in could dictate the difference in what you find in your visual inspection. So you got to put the weather conditions. If there's somebody else there with you, if the buyer is with you, if your assistant is with you, somebody else is with you, put them there because that helps. If there's any question about what you saw and when you saw it, you have somebody else. Do we make an avid for an unpermitted unit? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything that's in the property, you're going to make an avid for. If it's a permitted or an unpermitted unit, you're still going to do your avid because it's still part of the sale. Okay, and now what it does is, and this is the reason why I love this avid, is it breaks it down by area for you to be able to find, like go through and mark your notes on what you see in each one of those rooms. Now, we're not going to dig into everything, but remember, you're not diagnosing, you're just stating a fact. So if there's a hole, whether it's this big or it's this big, it's just a hole, okay? So hole only. If there is a stain, it is just a stain. It is not a water stain. There's nothing else. It's just a stain, right? So you have to be very vague, very generic about your determination, no diagnosing. Now, if there is nothing wrong, when you walk in and you see absolutely nothing wrong, which is okay, then you're going to write in here, nothing to note, right? If you walk through the living room, there's nothing wrong, nothing to note. Don't put brown carpet, white paint, new paint. Don't put anything like that. Just nothing to note. And don't leave it blank. I know people leave it blank. Put nothing to note because at least it means I'm making an acknowledgement that I walked into that room. I just didn't see anything. Okay. So if you go through all of these things and you don't see any issues, nothing to note. But if you do see stuff, a hole in the wall, a stain, whatever the case is, that's what you're going to mark down. Okay. But just a very specific statement, hole, stain, right? That's it. Then you're going to sign it, right? Century 21 All Stars by your name, and you're going to sign it and date it. Then you're going to have the buyer sign it, and then the other agents are also going to sign it. Okay, buyer and seller are going to sign it. That's the avid. Anybody have questions about the avid? Anybody? No? All right. So let's look at. Oh, go ahead, Mia.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute, but it wasn't letting me.
Yeah, I have to do it. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. I get it. Would anything be different in terms of the avid for a mobile home unit? Because I know I have to complete my avid soon, and I was just wondering, or does it all remain the same?
No, it's still the same. It's still the same.
Okay.
You're going to still look at the exterior. The thing you aren't going to have to make any like disclosures about in your avid are the park itself because that is common area. So it'll just be the exterior of the actual manufactured home and the interior, just like a regular house. Same.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Okay, we have another question here. Getting a bunch of stuff. Avid before or after home inspection. What do you suggest when it gets done? Well, it depends on when you have your home inspection done, but I would suggest you do it as early as possible. Okay. I probably wouldn't want to do it after I've read the home inspection. I would try to do it before if I could. Okay. What if I already did it, but now feel like I can be more thorough after this class? Should I do it again? Yeah, I mean, you can if you want to go make an amended Avid, but maybe what we could do is review your Avid, and I'll tell you if I think you're okay. But I think you're probably going to be fine. Okay, so let's look at. Oh, here we go. If there's rocks as part of the decoration on the foundation and seem loose, would we input Avid as well? If you would, I mean, unless you're wiggling the rocks, if you see it and it moves, I guess you could disclose it. It's what you see. So, I mean, I guess you could. Maybe that may be something you want to ask the seller about when they're doing the TDS. I like to do my Avid before I sit down with the seller to do the TDS, because then it helps me the things I see, because then I can kind of say to the seller, well, hey, you know what? I noticed that maybe that rock was a little loose. Is there any problems with the foundation? I could ask that question. Like, it helps. I don't know that you need to necessarily do that in your Avid, because again, it's a visual inspection, and it would be hard to say that I saw that a rock was loose. If it was falling out, like if there was rocks on the ground that had fallen out of that, then maybe I would put, hey, the decorative rock in the foundation is falling out. But I don't know that you need to go past that for that stuff on visual. Okay, quickly, these last two that we're going to look at. Seller's property questionnaire, we're not going to dig into it, but again, it's just an expansion of the TDS, and it asks about very specific things from the seller. We need to answer all of these questions, yes or no. Okay, and again, it's just like the TDS. Are you, the seller, aware of? So if they're aware of something, they check yes. If they're not, they check no. And if they check yes, then when they get down to this little section, they're going to put what the yes was. They're going to explain the yes. So just make sure that you're going through each one of these questions with them. Okay, you get through each one of these questions if they're aware of it or not. Just again, we're not trying to push them into making a disclosure. We just have to ask the question, hey, are you aware of this? Are you aware of whether the property was built before 1978? If yes, any renovations, right? We go back to that lead-based paint. Are you aware of any defects in the following, including past defects that have been repaired? Heating, air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, water, sewer, waste disposal, blah, blah. Look, here's the thing that we miss most of the time with this, is that we don't ask them to disclose stuff that they repaired in the past. And the reason it's important that they make those disclosures, if they can remember, if they're aware of them, is because those repairs that were made in the past, there is evidence of those repairs that still exist. So if there were to be any kind of new defect that needed to be repaired, and that repair person were to come out, whether that's a carpenter or a plumber or an electrician, they're going to see that past work, that past issues were repaired. And if we didn't disclose that, it's going to look like we were hiding it. Does that make sense? So it's really important that we ask that question. Hey, of this one, did we do any work? Did we do any of the work on these things? And were there a problem with them? And did you repair them? And when did you repair them? And let's disclose that information, okay? So again, we're going to go line by line with this with them. Ask them those questions. Get into it. Hey, water intrusion, whether past or present, in any part of the structure. Have you had any water that ever came in, whether it came from a leaking pipe, from a flooded toilet that did damage, right? That, and I don't mean did damage, but like that really flooded. If it just turned over one time and got the floor wet, not a big deal. I'm talking about issues where, you get problems with the main line where water's, where the waste is going out and it fills up the bathroom floor and it's coming out of the tubs in the toilet. That kind of water intrusion, those things need to be disclosed. But if one time the toilet overflowed or the tub overflowed and it didn't move past the bathroom, you're probably okay with not disclosing the intrusion. But it's still, you got to ask the questions. Should we be moving window coverings to look at all the windows? If it's not accessible to you seeing the window when you're there, like if the curtains are all the way closed, I don't see any reason to open the curtains, because remember, this is a visual inspection for you guys on your visual inspection. So going back to the Avid. So you're going to go through yes or no on any of those questions, explain what the yeses are on any of these, and then you're going to sign it. Right? Seller's going to sign it, buyer's going to sign it. Now, there are some sellers that are exempt from the TDS and this SPQ that we just went through. Those are probates, trusts, where the successor trustee is selling it, and REOs. Or there's some other things too. There could be conservatorships and things like that. But This is the disclosure that they are required to provide, and it is called the exempt seller's disclosure. And what this exempt seller's disclosure is it's a very miniaturized version of the SPQ. It has this section of questions that they need to answer yes or no to and explain their yeses. So again, this is the disclosure that we would use instead of a TDS and SPQ, we would use this for an REO, a probate, or a trust sale. Okay, and it's going to cover some of the same information as the SPQ, but this is what's required for them. Okay. All right, so that brings us to the end of disclosures. Do you guys have any questions? Let me see. What if they are a trustee, but they lived in the home? Good question, Patricia. Thank you for asking that. If they are the successor trustee and the home that they're living in was their principal residence, they are still required to provide a TDS and SPQ. Okay. So yes, good question, Patricia. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn off the screen share here while we answer some questions because I see them there. So let's go back to the questions. All right. Let's see. Next one. How far back in years do the sellers need to go on repairs when they've done? I've had a seller who doesn't recall 10 plus years of repairs that they have done. Fill in the best of it. Yeah, I mean, I would probably go back a year or two at most. I don't think you need to go. We bought the house in 1987 and we replaced the roof. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, I would stick within the last couple of years at the most on those disclosures for repairs. Because that's the stuff that's going to show. If we did stuff 10, 15 years ago, there's things that have been, all kinds of things have changed since then. What kind of insurance claim within the past 5 years would affect a sale? Every one of them pretty much, because if I've, let's say for example, I had flooding in my house and I used my homeowner's insurance to pay for that. That homeowner's insurance claim now made my homeowner's insurance go up, and it also made it more difficult for the new buyer to insure. Their insurance became more expensive. So any kind of homeowner's insurance claims against the property have an effect on the transfer of the property because it now affects the buyer's ability to obtain homeowner's insurance on the property. Okay. Any other questions? No. Do homeowner insurance claims appear on any of these reports? If you pay for them on the NHD report, you can get it's a clue report that comes with NHD that does look for insurance claims. Jesus, go ahead.
How big of a claim, homeowners insurance claim, it will stay? Any type of claim? And can you give us some examples of the claims?
I'm not an insurance person, so I don't know exactly what, but I would imagine that anything that you have your insurance pay for is going to show up on those reports. I mean, look, the homeowners insurance claims are not for things that are stuff that you would pay out of your pocket because the deductible is high enough. So it's going to be something major that had to get taken care of. So, I mean, any claim that you make for your insurance company for homeowners insurance is going to show up, is going to stick with the property. Anything else, guys? No. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys being here. Again, I will not have a class next Thursday. For those of you that are at All Stars, you will see Robert Brand. If you missed any part of this, if you want to revisit it, if you want to look through it, I try to always remind you guys, I have all of these videos are up on my YouTube channel, so you guys can go back and look at them. If you don't have the link to the YouTube channel, you can always email me. Oh, looks like we got one more question here. If seller does not know if the property has a septic tank or sewer line, how do you disclose that? Well, here's the thing. What I would say is, if the sellers live there 2 years or less, there is a chance they may not know that there's a septic. If they've lived there any time past 2 years and they tell you they don't know if they have a septic, they're lying to you, because I mean, the chances are that you'd have to, unless it's one person living in the property, you have to maintain a septic tank. It's going to get full. So it would be hard to believe that somebody doesn't know that they have a septic tank or they're hooked to the sewer line. Again, like I said, unless they bought it without knowing and they've lived there for less than 2 years. But otherwise, it's pretty hard to believe that somebody doesn't know. But if they don't know, then their disclosure would have to read, seller is unaware if we're attached to the sewer line or have a septic buyer to satisfy themselves, I guess would be your disclosure at that point. I just find it hard to believe that somebody doesn't know. Someone's asking about the 1031 class we have. I don't have those slides. You guys have Phil's email. I'm sure if you email Phil, those of you that were on the class, you could get those from him. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you all being here. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on about these exciting contracts. And I look forward to talking to you again. Bye-bye.